I am thrilled to be in studio, and those of you who might be watching this on Breitbart or on our Facebook page right now and see me in a coat and tie, the reason is because I'm with Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas. His first time on the show. It is so great to have you, Senator. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Alex, for having me on, and thanks for your interest in sacred duty.
Yeah, I read the book. I thought it was truly inspiring, and you write in a very plain way, but what it does is it shows reverence and respect, not just for our American armed forces, but particularly for our military dead. And this is something that the first question, and I have a million. Sacred Duty, again, is the book, A Soldier's Tour at Arlington National Cemetery. It's part memoir, it's part history lesson, and it is really, a lot of it is a deep history of Arlington. And I was just stunned by the amount of care and the amount of hard work that goes into honoring our war dead. And is this unique in the United States? What type of care we put into this?
The Old Guard of Arlington, about which I wrote Sacred Duty, pardon me, has been performing this mission for 71 years, and they have the highest standards. They seek perfection in every single funeral they perform. They may perform 20 to 30 funerals a day.
Wow.
Over 100 a week. But they know that for every fallen hero, for every family, that is the only funeral they will get. That is a once-in-a-lifetime moment.
Yes.
It's a lifetime in the making. That's why they spend hours and hours getting their uniforms into condition, pressing them on those industrial-sized press machines we had in our basement of our barracks, and making medals from hand, shining shoes, shining sabers, shining scabbards, perfecting our craft, carrying a casket, folding that flag to perfection, making 7 rifles sound like one during the 3-volley salute.
Yes.
Every action, every step is taken, as I describe in Sacred Duty, to ensure that family gets that one final indelible moment of perfect honor from the United States Army. Yes,
and that sort of care and respect is just so stunning, and the amount of effort that goes into it, it is a pursuit it takes incredible rigor to get that level of precision. And I sometimes wonder that in our era now of hyper ADD media, and with all the creature comforts, when you've got your Netflix and you now have the food delivery service is going to bring the food to your doorstep. We even now have the robot arm, which will feed you, that's coming. This is truly high character individuals that are assembled in the Old Guard. Talk to us about your experience there and what drew you to it.
Yeah, very much so. The Army selects, the highest caliber of soldier because they know how high stakes the missions are. Not just military honor funerals, but guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier, performing internationally famed ceremonies like the presidential inauguration or arrival ceremonies for state visits on the South Lawn of the White House. So the soldiers have very strict height and weight standards, physical fitness standards, very high test scores on the Army's general intelligence test, no blemishes on their legal record. For officers like me, you also had to be Ranger qualified and airborne qualified, usually up to perform the job for which you're applying proficiently in an earlier unit. You get there now, though, you don't know how to do your job. The Old Guard is a unique unit. There's no other unit like it in the Army. So you spend 2 to 3 months only preparing to do that job, training how to perform those funerals, how to get your uniform in a condition that it's ready to present to a family in Arlington. And again, all that's taken very seriously by these soldiers because they know that this is the last moment we have to honor our fallen heroes.
Incredible. And let's talk a little bit about your journey there, because people know a little bit about your background, being one of the more high-profile senators, particularly amongst the younger conservative crop of senators. And you're a double Harvard guy, Harvard undergrad, Harvard JD, just like Joel Pollack, one of our senior editors, who I know you go back with him a ways. And you enlist in the Army, and you don't just go into the JAG Corps, where of course they'd love to have you, someone with your brain power. You go into the infantry. You want to lead men. Talk about that.
Well, so I had to join the Army to redeem myself after going to law school. And where's the fun in being a lawyer? No, the Army needs lawyers. They have some great lawyers, but the infantry mission is the Army mission: close with and destroy the enemy by means of fire and maneuver. And after 9/11, that's what caused me to join the Army. 9/11 happened my last year in law school, so I finished school and put my affairs in order, paid off my loans over a couple of years, and then joined the Army. And I wanted to serve on the front lines, and I got a chance to do that twice, Iraq and Afghanistan. But as I write in Sacred Duty, when I was back from Iraq, the Army reassigned me to Fort Myer, adjacent to Arlington National Cemetery in the Old Guard, and I didn't know much about it at the time, but I did know once I was there that if I wasn't going to be downrange leading troops overseas, there was no more honorable way to serve here stateside than serving at Arlington National Cemetery.
And I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but there was one moment in the book where you talked about there was a day where you actually felt more nervous than being in Baghdad in combat. What was that day?
My very first ceremony was about 3 months in. Very large ceremony, change of command for our outgoing commander and our new commander. My first ceremony to stand on the marks, as we called it, down at Summerall Field, the beautiful parade field at Fort Myer, and you're standing there all by yourself as an officer in front of those troops, and the eyes of everyone is on you, and you have no support. In Iraq, I had sergeants in my Humvee. I had multiple Humvees in my patrols. Every soldier there was more experienced than I. That's by definition when you're a platoon leader. Sure. That's not the case when you're at the Old Guard on the march. You're out there all by yourself. Just like the battalion commander of the battalion that leads funerals in the cemetery told me, and he's a 5-time combat veteran. He served in the elite 75th Ranger Regiment. Yet when I asked him what it was like for him to perform funerals at Arlington now, he said, "I've never felt pressure like this anywhere in the Army."
That's unbelievable. It is so striking, and we've had some other historians on to talk about Arlington National Cemetery and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and it is something that I just can't recommend enough, that people have to do it. Put that on your bucket list. You have to see it, and it is learning what goes into it if you read the book, and the book, again, Tom Cotton's newest, Sacred Duty, Soldier's Tour at Arlington National Cemetery. It's essential reading. And the reason why I say it's inspiring is because it really does come from a genuine affection for our country and our military heroes. And part of the book, one of the sections, is a history. It's a brief history. And you select a handful of stories that are significant to you, clearly. Which stories did you pick, or a couple of them, and why were those the ones you wanted to share with your readers?
The Old Guard of the Army is literally the Old Guard. It was founded in 1784, so it's 3 years older than our Constitution. And for 160 years, They fought all the major conflicts of our country. They fought in the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, Spanish-American War. They were in the Philippine insurrection. In World War I, interestingly, they guarded the southern border after Pancho Villa's raids into New Mexico, so past is present in that case. And then in World War II, they were on occupation duty guarding POWs at the end of the war. But I think it's a story that not many people know about the Old Guard. They know about its present. They don't know about its past, but they also don't know how it carries that past forward. So, for instance, the uniform of Old Guard soldiers has a buff strap on the left shoulder, black and tan buff strap that mimics the shoulder strap of rucksacks that were carried in the Northwest Indian Wars under General Mad Anthony Wayne in the 1790s, which were the wars in which we finally ejected the British from what would become U.S. territory forever. That kind of battlefield valor continues to today. The Old Guard is not only a unit tasked with funerals in the cemetery or ceremonies around the Capitol. Its third mission, not often executed, thankfully, is defense of the nation's capital. It's the only large infantry regiment in the Capitol. One day, which it was 9/11. Within hours of the flight hitting the Pentagon, the Old Guard's medical platoon deployed to provide aid, and within just a few more minutes, hundreds of soldiers were there first to perform security operations, and then sadly over the next few days to recover all those remains from the Pentagon. And they were there for 30 days. Wow. A lot of people were surprised by that, but that really is just a reflection of the Old Guard's long and distinguished history on the battlefield.
Sure, and there's a fair bit of war stories, including, I think there was a line about how the fife and drum corps having the gas masks on. That's not a good day.
Yeah, so on 9/11, not only did the Old Guard defend the Pentagon, they also defended Fort Myer. Fort Myer is a very tiny home, or a very tiny fort, but it is home to many of the Army's senior leaders, like the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So they had to put Fort Myer on lockdown as well. And a young specialist who was in her second day at the Old Guard with the fife and drum corps, she was an expert flute player, got told to report back to her barracks where they were issuing Kevlars and gas masks so they could guard the regimental headquarters. And she said, the day they issue Kevlars and gas masks to the fife and drum corps is not a good day.
Yeah, it is not a good day, but these are inspiring stories, and it's part of the reason why I like the book. And I loved hearing about the excellence that is required, as you can tell, in the Old Guard. I was a musician growing up, not very good. I studied music in college. I thought it was so cool that you have literal PhDs in music, like truly world-class musicians as part of the Old Guard.
Yeah, the Fife and Drum Corps, as the Army Chief of Staff, General Mark Milley, soon to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, says, is one of the most highly educated units in the United States military. Almost all of them have, I think all of them do have college degrees today. More than half have masters, and several have PhDs in things like music theory. And they have them from some of the world's most elite conservatories like Juilliard or Berkeley. And they get there and they stay for a career. You know, they don't move on once they're in the Fife and Drum Corps. So some of the soldiers with whom I performed ceremonies 12 years ago are still there today and are featured in the book.
Did you have a favorite general from the Old Guard or a favorite war hero?
It's hard to find a greater American general than John Blackjack Pershing. His career was so long and it was so distinguished. He was such a fine man as well, suffered personal tragedy with the loss of his wife and children in a fire in the Presidio, too. And I think his burial, about which I write in the Old Guard, is also revealing of his character. He's the only, besides George Washington, the only man to achieve the General of the Army's rank. In World War II, he was still alive, so there was some concern about what they would do when they made the 9 5-star generals and admirals. That's why he was elevated to General of the Army. So still no one could elevate the old warhorse from, or outrank the old warhorse from World War I. But within 3 months of the Old Guard being reassigned to Arlington, he passed away. Harry Truman, who'd served underneath him in World War I, ordered a state funeral. It was the biggest funeral anyone had seen in Washington since the funeral for the World War I unknown in 1921. He had the choice of being buried in a place of honor in Arlington, but he chose a simple government-issue headstone alongside a lot of World War I veterans in Section 34 of the cemetery, which is now known informally as Pershing Hill.
Wow, I have chills. Incredible story. Tom Cotton again is with me. He's the senator from Arkansas, author of the book Sacred Duty, which is available now. I read it, loved it. If you guys can't tell, which I think you can at this point. Let's talk a little bit about the Old Guard. And what are their primary responsibilities for people uninitiated?
So 2 main ones that they do almost every day: military honor funerals in Arlington National Cemetery and ceremonies in the Capitol. Those ceremonies can be a retirement ceremony for soldiers at Fort Myer. They might be a arrival ceremony for a chief of defense or a minister of defense at the Pentagon. Sometimes even large ceremonies for visiting heads of state at the White House. Sometimes they do smaller ceremonies at the White House as well to say the president is going to credential new foreign ambassadors.
Sure.
But as I mentioned, they do have that third mission, which is contingency operations for the Capitol. So if we had a natural disaster, for instance, when I was there, we almost got called out to sandbag on the ship channel down by Fort McNair to make sure there wasn't flooding there. During the State of the Union or other big events, you'd be on short recall or even postured to help with local civil authority as well. It's called defense support to civil authorities. But on a day-to-day basis, military honor funerals in the cemetery and ceremonies around the Capital region.
Okay, but they're trained. These are combat trained.
Oh, sure.
These people have some of the highest training in the entire Army, which is amazing because it is not they're not going to deploy to do, they're not going to be doing raids in Baghdad. What they're going to be doing is mostly guarding Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. They'll be doing these formal events. Why is that? Why are they so highly trained?
Well, so that it's an infantry regiment, and they still train to infantry standards. So they get their young privates, which make up the bulk of the regiment, from Fort Benning, straight out of basic training and infantry training. And the Old Guard has a responsibility to send those soldiers back into the broader Army. And in fact, the leaders often stress, as I stressed in my time at the Old Guard to those young soldiers, that you are some of the Army's best. You may not be quite as proficient at small unit tactics or weapons employment as the young privates who are serving at the 101st Airborne, where I also served, but you are learning, because of the level of responsibility that is devolved down to junior soldiers, a degree of leadership and responsibility and discipline that is rare even in the broader Army. And although we go down to Fort A.P. Hill, about 90 miles south of here, to do tactical training and basic weapons qualification, keeps the soldiers fresh, they will get back into the broader Army. They won't have the same level of experience of someone who served in a tactical unit for 2 to 3 years on tactics, but they will very rapidly succeed because of their maturity, because of the leadership and responsibility experience they've had here. As I write in Sacred Duty, there are missions that at a normal Army division might be overseen by a colonel or a sergeant major, yet at the Old Guard, they're being overseen by an E4 specialist or a lieutenant. That's just the pace of operations that the Old Guard has and the amount of responsibility that's pushed down to the lowest level.
So I have to ask about some of these composure tests. There's so many specifics in the old guard that you have to. It's not just the combat training. It's not just that you can really press a suit. You have to be just totally steely and composed, and to a stunning degree. Talk to us a little bit about this.
Well, just put yourself at Arlington. You're at the graveside with the family, and there's a soldier like me 12 years ago standing at the head of the casket presiding over that service. How terrible it would be if that soldier ended up falling out. If he got lightheaded, if he stumbled backwards because he was not physically fit, he was not trained to stand at attention for long periods of time, he was not disciplined enough to eat well and drink well for the days leading up to funeral duties. The old guard stresses that. I've talked to senior sergeant majors there who came in saying, I didn't think a fallout was a big deal. It happened all the time back at Fort Drum. Well, at the old guard, it is a very significant event. That's why these soldiers have to go through such rigorous tests. Like you say, it's not just about pressing your uniform, but as I describe in sacred duty, they may have to stand at attention, as I did, for 75 minutes.
This is the part. It's freakish to me. That's even possible.
And I remember some of my friends back in the day when I was describing these standing proficiency tests to them. They said, "How hard can it be just to stand there?" I said, well, it's pretty hard. I mean, if you stand in one position for too long, it's very probable that you can have a loss of blood to the head and you end up passing out. But try standing somewhere. You don't realize how hard it is because normally you're shifting your weight around, leaning on something, making subtle movements that keep your blood flowing. But if you have to stand stock still for 75 minutes, it's a lot harder than it sounds. And especially if you're doing that in a wool uniform in Arlington National Cemetery in August.
And sometimes that there'll be a significant event, a retirement or something like that, or some sort of a state visit where potentially there could be a speech where you have to stand at attention for close to that long. That is a real thing you might have to do. Just stand in place. You can't shift.
Yeah. So take President Macron's visit to the White House when they had the arrival ceremony on the South Lawn. Lasted almost an hour. The soldiers moved positions, I think, twice in that entire period. Or as I described, some of the other unusual feats of physical stamina in sacred duty. The Continental Color Guard is the Armed Forces' most prominent color guard. They carry the national colors, the Army colors. At major sporting events like the Super Bowl or All-Star Games or what have you, they perform hundreds of missions around the city for conventions and so forth. But the battle streamers that are on the Army colors, a battle streamer for every battle the Army has ever fought, starting with the country's founding all the way up to today, weigh the equivalent of 88 pounds when you extend it forward in your harness during the national anthem when you're saluting. Try holding 88 pounds with your arms stuck straight out. Or, as I write in Sacred Duty, when you have an arrival ceremony with two foreign leaders. So, for instance, when the Minister of Defense from both Sweden and Finland came to the Pentagon, that's three national anthems back-to-back holding an 88-pound weight straight forward without having it quiver at all.
So, to bring to bring this part of the interview full circle, I kind of introduced how I'm worried a little bit about our country getting soft. And these are the people who are the most dedicated to precision and perfection, even, because that's what's necessary to perform these duties. What are some lessons that you took from the old guard that some of us who are civilians that we could bring to our life?
Well, when you spend as much time around soldiers as I have, not just 12 years ago, but over the last year researching this book, you realize that there are at least some young men and women who are not soft in our country, and they are willing to bear considerable hardship to pay honor to those who went before them and who laid down their lives, or in the case of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers, who gave up not just their lives but their identity so that we could live in freedom. When you also spend so much time at Arlington, you recognize what a special place it is.
Yes.
A place of unity and healing and reconciliation. That's somewhat of a historic irony, since Arlington was born in the ashes of the Civil War, the most divisive time in our country's history. But I think because of that origin, it became our national cemetery, the one preeminent cemetery that we go to, not just to visit a loved one, but to pay honor to all those who have worn the country's uniform, and especially those who fell on the battlefield.
Yeah, and I'll say that when you read the book, and this is a great tease, I have more questions on Arlington, but I know we're running short on time, Senator Tom Cotton, but if you read the book, you'll get a great history of Arlington. It'll just be it's meaningful to all of us. If you're listening to this show, Arlington means something to you, but it'll be twice or three times as meaningful after you get some of the history and what goes into it, what goes into the honor that we have for our war dead in this country, which is it's a stunning thing. And Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, is a huge part of it. Senator, I promised my audience I would ask you one question on current politics. Did you have a reaction to the immigration debate reset by the president yesterday?
Well, reserving final judgment until I see an actual bill, of course. I would say it's a big step in the right direction for the way we approach our legal immigration system. It's modeled in large part on the RAISE Act, which I introduced 2 years ago,
sure,
which would reorient our legal immigration system towards younger, higher skilled workers who speak English, who can contribute to our economy from the very beginning on their first day here without hurting blue-collar wages. So I think that's a step in the right direction. As far as the asylum crisis goes, it addresses a lot of the problems at the border that have resulted from well-intentioned laws that are now being abused by people seeking asylum for fraudulent or bogus reasons, oftentimes aided by American groups that are giving them the talking points that they need to get across our border, as well as providing the physical infrastructure that the Border Patrol needs to address the crisis at our southern border. So I want to see the final bill, of course, but step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I think you and I are pretty simpatico on most of the immigration issues, and I felt similarly. So hopefully, fingers are crossed on that one. Senator Tom Cotton, really appreciate the time. Everyone should pick up Sacred Duty, A Soldier's Tour at Arlington National Cemetery, and thanks for what you're doing for our country.
Thank you, Alex.